the board. His bishop was attacked. He could have saved it with an exchange. This is a sacrifice. Magnus accepted it. But after bishop takes pawn here, saving the white queen from this attack, just sliding back, would have given Magnus a huge advantage. The problem for black is that this knight is under attack, and this rook in the corner, if you take it, white will simply recapture. White has 2 pieces for a rook, a small material advantage. Magnus instead chose to give up his queen. This is Magnus at the top of the table, where he doesn't really care so much. He's just playing for the gallery at this point. He took this knight, given a double question mark by the computer. I think we can understand why. The queen falls, but once we do a bit of a roundup here, a recap, we see it's 3 pieces for white, 3 minor pieces. It's a knight and 2 bishops for the black queen, so rough material equality, but unnecessarily wild.
David, you say we can understand why. I can understand why it's given the double question mark. I can't understand why Magnus necessarily went for it.
Me neither. I think he just loves sacrificing his queen, Magnus. I've spent enough time with him to know that if he can play a controversial move, kind of a shocking move, then he does often.
Ever the entertainer.
He really is, and I think he entertains himself most of all. You know, whenever he finds something that could be fun to play on, he knows he's safe in the qualifiers. He knows that both these players have made it, and it's really the most challenging option that he's taken. And it could also have something to do with the fact that moving that queen away, he didn't like that as much, probably found it a little less fun than this option. It's creative chess. That's what he enjoys. But looking at this, we were talking about being materialistic in the studio, right? 3 pieces, 3 minors versus a major. Nordebek's queen. Which side are we picking? Because so much of it depends if the queens and the majors are actually able to put pressure on Magnus's king at the center of the board. Nordebek needs to find a way to get his knight, which hasn't made a single move, to come closer into the game, to come towards the center of the board. Magnus has to, meanwhile, regroup all his minors to make sure the king is defended, create threats against his opponent. Looking at the king's safety here, I do like the queen versus the minor pieces here. What about you, David?
Yeah, normally I'm quite biased towards the queen, but I can see why Magnus has gone for this. I think it's just because black's pieces are temporarily so passive, but this one could turn in any direction. The one thing I'll say is, if Magnus was at the bottom of the table, needed to play safe, needed points on the board, he would never have given up his queen. It's just the fact that he knows he's safe, he knows he's in the quarterfinals, even if he loses his next 4 games. So yeah, he's just trying to entertain us. He's trying to win the Brilliancy Prize.
Well, and some of our fans in chat, though, they're going to be wishing that maybe they could have him take that move back. We asked in our Twitch chat who they believe will win the round 8 pairing, Magnus, Nordebek, or will it go to a draw. 49% of our audience thinks Magnus will take it. Well, after that queen sacrifice, maybe it is less likely. Here we have a couple of moves flying out onto the board. I did see an X showing up there at some point, so an indicated missed opportunity.
Yeah, and that was me. I hadn't updated the board. Sorry, everyone at home, but some crazy moves. A question mark now given by Nordebek for the most natural move in the world, and it's clear that this white king is the main problem for Magnus. The knight's actually done a bit of dancing. It's now forked 2 of the black rooks, and Magnus now needs to keep this king safe. Whether he tries to hide in this corner or whether he runs towards the other side of the board, he needs to be extremely careful. I mentioned I normally favor the queen. Magnus, it should be mentioned, always favors the pieces if he can. A clear preference for Magnus throughout his career. So he needs to prove his point here.
Yeah, and if Nordebek isn't careful, he might be losing more material right now. But depending on where Magnus shifts with the king, whether it's on the left side or the right side, there will be a way for Nordebek to save one of the 2 rooks. Either via giving a check on the open line that's next to the king, or via pinning that knight in the center line of the board. And Magnus does make a decision. It's neither of the 2. He falls back, and it's an inaccuracy.
And you can see kind of how
immediately
messy.
responses.
Yeah, you can see how messy this game is. The accuracy numbers creeping up there on the bottom of your screen. That's just for this game.
Yeah, and a quick count shows right now black does have the queen. In return, though, Magnus now has a rook and 2 bishops, so a big material advantage for Magnus. The problem is, again, the white king, which is now even more bare than before, and this pawn is now coming to kick away a defender. The black knight might then jump into the action here. I would be terrified, I've got to admit, as Magnus Carlsen, as the clocks tick down. It's 4.5 minutes for white.
Oh, king's on the run.
For black.
King's on the run.
Ooh.
Oh, and Nordebek keeps pushing the pawns. Magnus's bishop lands on a key file where it can be protected by one of the pawns moving forward and just plants himself to a square, restricting Nordebek's rook. Not only blocking a central line, but taking away a key activity square on the open file next to Black's king as well. So a really nice call there by Magnus.
Yeah, that was a key move. Anything else, and Magnus was actually losing on the spot. He had to find this move, and yeah, it's all about piece control, as freestyle chess always is. Okay, Nordebek plays a very natural move, but the bar rises up for white. I was going to say this is the most natural move in the world, going pawn hunting, maybe a check here, but he is giving Magnus the time to run away to safety. The white king, if it gets into that corner, all the pieces will gang up against the queen, and he just has too many soldiers, Magnus.
In this kind of a piece dynamic, when you're playing against the minors, so much of it, the advantage, the pressure depends on your opponent's king position. And Magnus is literally 2 moves away from manually castling his king and bringing it to the safest spot closest to all his pieces and pawns. So it doesn't matter if you're sacrificing a pawn at the center of the board. And I think Magnus will go for this idea. I'll be really surprised if he even takes a timeout to actually defend one of the 2 pawns. Once the king gets there, it's the minors that'll do the talking.
I mean, you said it earlier, David. Magnus loves an opportunity to trade the queen off for the minor pieces and prove his point in terms of how valuable they are. As more and more pieces fall off the board, their value only increases, right? Queen may be the most powerful piece on the board, but she cannot do it alone. And right now, she's losing reinforcements, right? Her options are a lot thinner in terms of how she can ultimately attack that white king.
Yeah, she just has a knight for backup pretty much. The black rook is irrelevant here. It's made redundant. It just can't get into the game. The knight alone as well with the queen cannot really stop the white king from sliding away, slinking away behind its own pieces. I will actually mention the most viewed game that I've ever commentated on. I think he's got 7-8 million views now on YouTube. It was Magnus sacrificing the queen for 3 pieces against Anish Giri, and that blew up the internet. Again, it's happened here. He's given up a queen for several pieces, and it looks like he's again on the way to victory.
Okay, I'm trying to reason a move here for Nordebek. Feels like, again, if the idea is the white king wants to run away for a manual castle, I'm looking at sliding the queen down to that 2nd rank and just basically lasering the king. My expected response is the bishop slides back to block and open up a new avenue, but can our knight jump forward then?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, then the knight would jump forward with deadly effect. Now the white king would be forced out into the open. I think he's going to give this check. You know, this is just a variation. We put that on the board. Here, Nordebek did give the check. Nice spot, nice prediction.
Okay.
And I'm expecting Magnus to actually try and hide between his pieces now.
Ah, that's the other option there. Okay.
Yeah, Magnus.
That's a gutsy call, right? Getting your king still out there. The point is that there's very little chance that the black knight can actually get to that king. You've got 1 square, and then you can trade that off for your bishop, keep everything safe. And as long as that rook is tied down and not allowed to give a 3rd rank check to that king, white's feeling very happy. The knight next will jump onto the board. The f5 square looks incredibly juicy for the white knight to land on as well.
Yeah, the white rooks might start sliding across as well, not just to hit the black queen, but also to start targeting the black king. There's so many warriors here for white. If they start to combine, if they start to coordinate nicely, then this is going to be very one-sided. Also, look at the clock. Nordebek, it's just hard to find moves for him. I don't think grabbing pawns here is necessarily his #1 priority. I don't think that's the most relevant pawn. And Magnus, big favorite.
Also look at the players, right? You can see the tension and the nerves on Nordebek right now. He's had his first loss, and he could very well be staring at his 2nd loss in a row today. Magnus hydrating himself, looking absolutely chill for the win here.
The good news for Nordebek, he did so much good work yesterday that he enters today with 5 points and still sits in incredible position. So while it does look like Magnus has wrestled...
They're worth at least 6 points, 3 each. Together on an open board, they might be worth even more, a rook worth 5. The one trouble for Magnus here is that black has a passed pawn. The b pawn could start running at some point as a distraction, but the bishops are so nicely centralized that they can cover any promotion squares as well as kind of cover their own pawn advances. At some point, Magnus might start pushing these pawns forward. Black's pawns on the right side as well, very weak.
And to add to Nordebek's problem is exactly that, right? You just shift one of these 2 pawns that are highlighted next to each other, and the conversion task becomes that much more difficult. Here, these pawns can absolutely be targeted once that white pawn moves 1 step ahead, opening up the bishop diagonals. And I think he's setting that up. You know, you advance the g pawn, you advance the f pawn, and you start winning material, create a passer. The 2 bishops versus rook is a huge advantage to Magnus Carlsen here.
Yeah, Magnus has also actually tied down the black rook in front of its own pawn. The rook gets in the way, but you can't move it out of the path of that pawn because that pawn would drop. So 3 isolated pawns for black. Yes, it's 3 versus 3, but white's pawns control each other, defend each other. The black pawns might start falling off soon. This is winning for Magnus, and he is an endgame god, as we all know by now. So I would expect him to convert, but Nordebek, so tenacious.
He's doing it step by step. He might even start first by winning that lone pawn on the left side of the board. You know, Magnus, by chasing that rook away from the defense, the bishop can come into the attack, but he's playing slowly. Magnus is enjoying his position. There's no rush. He makes sure that every pawn of his is defended by a piece or another pawn, and then he will start going for Nordebek's weakness on the other side of the board. Bishop attacked, move it.
Yep.
Centralize.
Centralize is good. You could also blockade black's pawn on that left side from ever moving again, and just try to capture that pawn in the next few turns. But yeah, Magnus, he went from spectacular queen sacrifice to now endgame grind. He's got so many gears. I think that's the difference that makes him stand out over the youngsters right now.
It just turns the game into whatever version of the game he wants to play in that moment on that day.
Absolutely, you know, and he does fall back with the bishop, hits that rook. To your point, I think for Nordebek, his biggest chance in this game was making sure that Magnus's king did not get to safety. Once it did, it was a Magnus Carlsen show. He's just transformed his advantage from minor pieces against the queen to 2 minor pieces against the rook, and this is really the dream composition, the bishop pair.
And so while we do kind of expect this one to be a bit of a grindy game as Magnus tries to maneuver in the end game to a winning result for himself, we did have Jan Nepomniachtchi take another victory in his second day of play up against Vidit Gudrathi.